three things that I need to worry about in identity. One is the list of where I will take identity from. One is like, do I take it from Google? Do I take it from my Active Directory? Do I take it from some other federated service? Once I've done that and I've got the list of identities, that providers that I'll work with, then I define how my relying party application is going to run. That's my Windows Phone application. I define out how it's going to work, what types of tokens it's going to use, and how I want to process the claims that come back. And I create rules for each one of those different processing things. So let's get started. I'm going to create some identity providers for our application. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say, by default, I've got Windows Live ID as one of them. I'll add another one. I can go out and say, let's add Google. I could add Facebook. I could add AWS Federation. So if you have like Active Directory, a corporate environment, you could expose that out through to this and then use that ADFS to make this all work. But I can turn on Google pretty easily. Just click on Google, add it, specify text that we want here, Google Meet, whatever you want to say. Click on next, an image URL, and you end up with a list of providers here. And I could also add Yahoo if I want to. And each one of these providers then is going to have a set of claims that could be processed through with that provider. The second thing we do is define how our application is going to use that identity. That's called a relying party application. That is the application that is using this identity, relying on the bouncer to make sure that the people coming in have a valid identity. The relying party application will add a new one, and we'll define this out for our application. We call this RPA on Windows Phone 7. I can specify how I want this to work. I could import from AWS Federation metadata file if I have that. But generally speaking, I'm going to do this manually. There's a couple of pieces that are real important. One is the realm. This is where that application is actually going to run. I have a return URL where if I'm in a web solution and I want to return back control to someplace, it would then go back out to that. And then I've got the error URL. We're using a phone application, so instead of doing like an HTTP and then bankotips.com, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a URI, and I'm going to just call this WP7 my RPA or something like that. This name is going to need to be passed from the phone, saying here's the realm I'm playing from. The other piece is what type of token are we going to work with. In a web solution, I might use SAML 2.0 or 1.1, security application markup language. I could also use the simple web token for a mobile application. This is a nice, simple format, not a lot of overhead. Pretty much as standard format. I can use that, or I could specify other things. And then I come down, I can specify how I want this to work. I'm going to generate a token. I would copy that and use that if I'm doing some OAuth kind of processing on the server. I would use that then to do the decrypting of the data when it comes through. Click on Save, and it's going to then go out and it's going to create those settings for my RPA on Windows Phone 7. So now that I've defined my application, let's go out and talk about the rule groups. This is how am I going to handle the bag of claims that come back from that bouncer. By default, when I go out and I come to your application at the URI my RPA, what it's going to do is it's going to redirect me out to get some identity. That identity is going to come back with a bunch of claims attached to it. Different providers will provide different sets of claims depending on where they're coming from. For instance, Live ID only returns back just a user identifier, just a user ID. Google gives you also, in addition to that, a name and an email, same as Yahoo. Facebook gives you the email, plus it might give you groups, and it might give you some other rich information. If you're using Active Directory ADFS, you can get very rich, and you can say, okay, well, this person is in this role, and be able to go through a lot of definitions. What we're going to do is we're going to generate some basic rules for this. And by default, when I click on Generate, it's going to take the three identifiers or identity providers that I've specified. It'll create a set of rules for each one of those based on all the claims that come in. So if I scroll down after I generate these, what you'll find is that I'm going to have a total of 7 claims, 3 for Google, 3 for Yahoo, and 1 for Live ID. The 1 for Live ID is just the name identifier, the one that came through. The others are going to be name and email address for both Google and Yahoo. So if I look at what comes in, I'm going to suppose I want to work with the name. I can create custom rules to do processing for me, so in case I don't have one. In this case, Windows Live ID does not have a name attached to it. I really like working with name, and I'd rather use name than a name identifier by default. So I'm going to add a custom rule to this, where I'm going to say that if my identity provider comes in, and say you selected your Google ID, you can see I'd have 3 different choices of types of claims that come in. If I go to Windows Live ID, I see I only have just the one. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take that name identifier and I'm going to copy it in from the input claim into an output claim. And the output claim we're going to send this to is going to be called the claim name. So I'm using that name schema. And we'll just go ahead and pass that output claim type to do that. And we're going to pass through the initial value of that claim and just say, okay, save. I could also specify some specific thing. But now I've got this custom rule for the product name thing. Now that I've done this, my access control services, which is this service, https rpa-demo.accesscontrol.windows.net, any application that comes out to this is going to go through this service and it's going to use that process to figure out, okay, well, what's going on? So how do we use this in our application? So I've defined out how I want that to be. I've defined out what my identity providers are. We still don't even have a Windows Phone 7 application. So let's add one. I'm going to go over to my Visual Studio. I'm going to click on Add a New Project. And I'm going to add a Silverlight for Windows Phone. We'll call this our RPA client. You can call it whatever you want. You can target different phone OS versions because most of the phones today are running on Windows Mango, which is 7.1. I'm going to take advantage of the service capabilities of what that can do. So we'll select 7.1. And this gives us our initial phone application. And if I were to run it, it'll actually run inside the emulator. It'll have a schema. It'll have some XAML for markup. Plus, we'll have a description of what's going on inside the page. So I can take, if you haven't seen the Silverlight Designer, some of the things you can do is I can zoom in and zoom out. I can change the layout of things. A lot of times I end up making this a lot smaller so I can see what's going on. And because this is a webcast, I can make the font smaller than if I'm doing a live presentation because presumably you can sit closer to the screen if you need to. Let's get this thing here to stop waiting for me. But I can take this, I can make this smaller or larger. I can also make some more room here. So right now you can see here's my page. I can call this my game. And the thing is that in our application where we're running the Rock, Paper, Azure, how we're working our application, you remember that we've got a flow chart. And the way the flow chart is going to work is that we're going to have the main screen, which is going to be that game screen. That's going to be mainpage.xaml. I have a splash that automatically gets created for me, and then I've got a login screen. So we're going to create this login screen that's right here and add that to our project. So the way we're going to do that is going to go out to our Solution Explorer, right-click on our game, and say Add a New Item. And we're going to add a page that's going to be called My Login. .xaml. My login.xaml is where I'm going to do all of that authentication conversation. And again, I can take this, make this a little bit smaller. I can come over here and I can customize the look and feel. If you worked with XAML before, one of the things you know is that I can change like the title of this by going over into the XAML directly and just type in login ... I can also select an item up here and say, okay, well, I'm working with the my application, and I can do the F4, and I can change the property edits, and say this is RPA on WP7. And that'll then update in both places. So it basically is a couple different ways I can go out and work with this. Now, the key thing is that I want to work with the access control services. And to do that identity conversation, there's a couple of different ways I can do that. One is to build out a custom control that will talk to ACS and then handle that login conversation. Much easier way is to go out and do that using an existing set of code that is created by someone else. So in my case, what I want to do is I'm going to take this over here, and I'm going to browse my way out to acs.codeplex.com. And there is a Silverlight user control built for ACS that I can go out and download sample code for. This has a user control that implements that conversation, handles ACS 2.0 stuff. I can download this, and then once I can go into my Visual Studio and add that control to my toolbox. So if I go into my toolbox, you'll see that I've got the Access Control Services log in here. All I did was I went out and clicked on Choose Items, and then I browse out to where that assembly lives, and that is actually inside of the download, wherever you saved it to. I happen to throw it into a set of, go up here to this, go out to code, FY12, and I've got a folder out here called bin where I actually pulled in the Silverlight Phone Federation assembly, basically built it out, make sure it's all working, and then I just add that assembly to my toolbox. So if I add that to my toolbox, then I can use it inside of my project. So let's go ahead and I can grab this and just drag it onto the page of my phone application. Now this is the login screen, so I want that login to work. When I do that, I get the little control. It's adding it right here. I can then customize how it looks. I can also right-click on this on the designer, reset the layout. That'll get rid of all of the extra elements except for just that login control. So now I've got a login screen that's going to have everything on it that I need.